Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Selina, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I turned two scrap pieces of fabric into a really cute Co-Ord set. For this project I only had 157 centimeters by 156 centimeters of the patterned fabric and 185 centimeters by 165 centimeters of the lining fabric. I only spent £7 for the patterned fabric and £12 for the lining fabric, making the total cost of this project £19, which is really impressive considering you would spend probably a lot more on each of the individual items in a store. Since I already self-drafted a pattern for the vest before making this video, I only needed to figure out the measurements for the skirt, so I ended up cutting out two pieces of 123 centimeters by 41 centimeters of the patterned fabric and 123 centimeters by 39 centimeters of the lining fabric. There were definitely a few learning curves throughout the process, but overall I'm very happy with how it turned out and I hope you like it as well. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know down below, but without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to start by serging one side on each of the pieces which I showed in my intro. Then I place the two serged edges right sides facing and sew them together. I then iron the seams open. I then took my patterned fabric and serged the entire length of the bottom. I did not repeat this step with the lining fabric as I'm going to tuck the bottom into the hem of the patterned fabric. To hem the bottom of the skirt, I'm folding the serged edge once inwards so that it tucks in the lining fabric, making sure that the overall hem width is 1 centimeter. To create the pleats, I pulled fabric from the right hand side and tucked this underneath until the width of the pleat is 4 centimeters. Then I pinned this in place and repeated the steps, making sure each pleat is touching. Also noting that I left roughly 3 centimeters seam allowance at the beginning and end of the skirt. Once I was happy with the placement of the pleats, I sewed down 5 centimeters on the edge of each pleat to ensure they stay in place. As my fabric was too thick to use the backstitch button on the machine and the sewing pedal, I turned the manual sewing wheel whilst pushing my fabric to make 3 to 4 stitches. Then, with the needle still in the fabric, I rotated this and sewed back along my previous stitches. Once I got back to the top of the fabric, I rotated this once again and sewed the rest of the 5 centimeters down the pleat. To attach the waistband, I began by placing one of the bottom sides of the waistband right sides together and pinned it in place with the top of the skirt. Then I sewed this in place. I then serged the fabric where I had connected the top of the skirt and waistband. I kept this in here because it was part of the process, however, as the fabric was so thick, the serged edges looked kind of crappy and I honestly think I could have done without it, as the waistband will tuck this away anyway. I then proceeded to serge both sides of the skirt starting from the top of the waistband all the way down to the hem. I didn't film the process, but I also serged the top of the waistband. Next, I pinned the 2 pieces of fabric partially up the skirt to prepare for installing my zipper. In order to find out how far I needed to sew, I placed the top of the zipper in the fold line of my waistband and made a mark of where the bottom of the zipper reached. I then sewed these 2 pieces a few millimeters past the mark to ensure there would be no gaps. Then I pressed the seams open. Also, on a side note, in order to sew the sides together, I undid some of the hem so that it would be easier to sew the pieces together, and then tucked the new seam line up and re-sewed the hem. As I mentioned earlier, I am now pinning the top of my zipper where the waistband will be folded in half and securing the rest of the zipper in place. Now for the scary part, actually fastening the zipper in place. I made sure to attach my zipper foot beforehand so I could sew as close to the zipper teeth as possible. This was quite tricky, so I definitely recommend taking your time with it. After I sewed the zipper in place, it was a good time to try on the skirt and make sure it actually fit. You can see we now have a large waistband that will soon be folded in half and sewed down. I know my invisible zipper is still slightly visible and I could go in and fix it, but I decided to leave it for now. For the waistband, I'm going to fold the top side roughly 1 centimeter inwards to follow the flow of the seam and zipper, and then fold this in half. I wanted to make sure that the serged end of the waistband would cover any visible stitches and the top of the skirt. I have already sewed the side of the waistband together, however, in order to sew the rest of the waistband down, I will be stitching in the ditch so that the stitches would be caught in the serged edges on the back and will not be visible in the front. After this was sewed in place, I gave the waistband a good iron. I didn't show this process, but I decided to add some belt loops and top stitch the waistband as it was too loose around my waist and needed some more structure. You can see here how the waistband doesn't quite fit my waist, but to be fair, with the belt this is not even noticeable and it's better to be too loose than too tight. To finish off the skirt portion of this video, I thought I'd show you how the inside of the skirt is constructed and what this looks like in terms of visible stitches and seams. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I already have my vest pieces drafted, so I thought I'd show what these look like. For me personally, I like to just make one of each pattern and then flip them to get the other side. And here are all of my pattern pieces after cutting them out. I started off by pinning together the front 2 pieces of the vest at the sides where I will sew them first. I then repeated this step for the other side and took them to my sewing machine. I then serged the edges on both sides. So after I've serged the sides, I'm going to unfold this and iron the seam away from the front and towards the back. Then I pinned the back pieces together the same as the front. as with the front, I sewed, serged and ironed the back pieces. Then I took one front piece and one back piece and placed them right sides together, pinning in place the shoulder. Once the shoulders have been secured together with a normal straight stitch, I went ahead and serged the edge. When ironing, I made sure to push the seam towards the back of the vest. Once I repeated all the same steps for my lining fabric, I took both pieces to my serger and serged down all the middle back sides. Next, I am placing the back pieces right sides together and pinning them in place for both the pattern fabric and the lining fabric. Once I've sewed the back pieces together, I'm going to press open the seams. Here's what everything looks like after the back pieces have been joined together. I'm now going to top stitch every seam I have on the front and back, making sure that each seam is pressed to the back before sewing them down. I'm only showing the top stitching for the lining as it's easier to see the finished results. Then I place the lining pieces right sides together with the patterned fabric, and I'll be starting off by just sewing this area together. Just as a side note, you want to make sure that the seams of the patterned fabric and the lining fabric line up as best as possible. Then I went in and serged the sides. Then I started to unfold the pattern and lining fabric. I then went in to understitch the lining fabric, making sure the seam was pressed towards the lining side. After ironing the whole vest, this is what it currently looked like. Now, as I still have a little bit of excess fabric around the armholes, before I move on, I'm just going to cut along the white line. Once that's done, I turned the vest inside out and pinned along the entire armhole. After it's been sewed together on both sides, it will need to be flipped right sides out again, but before I did this, I wanted to understitch the lining even though I could only do it on either side up to the shoulder before I would catch the fabric underneath. So here's what it looks like after the task was complete. Now it's time for the side seam under the armpit. In order to do this without having visible seams on the inside, I first placed the lining pieces right sides together, then flipped the pattern pieces over the top so that they too could be placed right sides together. After sewing the pin pieces together, this is how the side should look like. Here's another angle of how the inside was constructed. Whilst the bottom of the vest is still open, now is a good time for me to try it on and see if there needs to be any amendments. As you can see by the pins and white lines, I ended up sewing diagonally from the centre underarm to the bottom of the vest as I wanted a tighter fit. After I've re-sewed the sides and tried the top on again to make sure I like how it fits, I top stitched the side seams as I have done with all the rest. I then prepared to hem the vest by serging all the way along the bottom. So to actually hem the vest, I'm folding the lining and pattern side 1 cm inwards and pinning them together. This will be the last time we can try on the vest and make changes if need be, so it's best to do this before you sew the hem in place. Just a few things to note: make sure that when you fold the hem 1 cm inwards, you try to match the seams of the patterned and lined fabric, and also for this vest, as my lining was brown, I used white thread for the top and brown thread for my bobbin so that it would look more professional and seamless. Then I ironed everything firmly in place along the entire vest. Moving on to the final step, the buttons. I'm starting by poking the needle through the lining side to the front, and then putting the needle through my button loop and feeding this through the pattern side to the back, and repeating the process several times until I feel it's secured enough. To finish and secure the button in place, I thread the needle through my button loop once more, then tie the thread 3 to 4 times around the button. Then right next to the base of the button, I put the needle in and then back out through both layers of fabric until I'm able to put the needle through the thread loop and tie a knot. After all my buttons were secured to the left side of my vest, I moved on to creating the buttonholes. I personally struggle with the buttonhole attachment, and so I kind of just wing it and mark where I want the buttonholes to start and finish, then choose this setting on my machine and freehand it. If you're scared about seam ripping too far, you can always place a pin at the end of your buttonhole to make sure it doesn't rip any further than that point. Once I repeated these steps for the other buttons, I was officially done. The shoulder and armhole definitely do flare up roughly a centimetre, but it's a lesson learned for the next time. Other than that, I'm really happy with the way this turned out, and to end this video, here's how I styled the two pieces.